Yeah, well, yeah, because like with NFTs, you have to trick people into getting involved, right? With AI, the AI can trick people.
Yeah, I was gonna say, with the power of AI, you can really sell those.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 464 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's April 19th, 22x4. Before we get started, we do have a warning. And a promise, really. There's gonna be profanity in this show. Just throughout, all around. So get ready for that. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. All right, you guys, we got some interesting things going on this week to talk about. Crashlands 2 is humming along. We are just cruising on that so fast that we don't have anything to say. Everything's just moving really, really fast, and we're pretty pumped about it. So instead, we want to kind of talk about just some stuff going on in the world at large.
Yeah.
In the tech space, in the parenting space. Okay, so interesting news this week, or AI news, which is there's like a trillion things happening in the AI space every week. Most of it is nonsense. Some of it is
It's almost 100% bullshit and scams. So
yeah,
you know.
But then every now and then something comes out and we're like, oh no.
Yep.
And I think so. Last week it was Udio, this music generation tool, which I played around with quite a bit, and it's good.
Mm-hmm. It's very fun.
We won't go into too much stuff about that, but if you haven't heard about it, just check it out. Udio, it's just you type in a text prompt and you get a 30-second clip of a song, and then you can like change the prompt and extend it, and like you can give it lyrics and make stuff. Apparently it can also do just stand-up comedy somehow.
Interesting.
I listened to and like all things, it can be hit or miss, but every now and then a joke pops out and you're just like, that's actually really funny. Pretty interesting. But yeah, check that out. That's called Udio. I think it's just in like a free public beta. So there's no pricing model or anything like that. It's just like, I think you can generate like 1,200 songs in a month per account or something like that. Yeah. They're just like opening it up to get as many people using it as possible to get feedback on it. I have a lot of thoughts about the implications of something like this, but we'll talk about that another time.
Yeah, just go have fun. Just go have fun.
Yeah, for now, go have fun. Don't think about it. Don't think about it too hard. So the thing I want to talk about for this week is this real-time facial animation tool from Microsoft called VASA1, VASA-1 or dash. I don't know it's a hyphen. So this is a model, and it's an AI model that can be given a photo of a face and a voice clip of someone speaking, and it will nearly, according to all the previews, it will nearly instantly animate this face speaking and saying the stuff from the voice clip, where it maps like emotive facial expressions and natural sort of like head movements and gestures and stuff into the video. They don't need like 10 different images of your face from different angles to like create a composite or anything. No, it's just like straight up, just like a LinkedIn style headshot.
Yeah,
could just be dunked into this thing, and just any voice clip, and then it just goes, and it is. I don't want to say it's uncanny. It's actually canny. Like you can't tell that it's not a real video of that person saying that stuff, and it can also do like different angles, like not just the angle from the picture. It can like orient in different angles around the speaker so that they're like looking off to the side, like they're in an interview or whatever. I got a chance to look at it, and yeah, the implications of this are weird. And I think Microsoft knows that because they are not releasing it.
Yeah, if by weird you mean bad. So we're just talking about
calamitous.
the podcast. this is one of those things that just shouldn't exist. There's no use case for it that warrants its existence.
Well, the reality is there are a lot of use cases for it, but they are dwarfed by the number of.
Are any not fucked up in at least some way though? Like,
I think there's quite a few really. I think there's quite a few really good ones.
Yeah, they cite one in the paper, which was talking about using it as a tool for essentially calling back people, like a nurse calling someone back to give them the blood test results and stuff like that. Where it does, as in like basically just reading them the results and telling them about stuff, and then also they
the person doing it.
Yes, rather than a nurse doing it.
Why?
There's just not enough nurses.
Yeah. so you're talking about you're talking about robots practicing medicine. Then is what we're talking.
I don't know.
About.
I mean, I'm talking about what they did with this robot, and then the survey results being better regarded for the AI than they were for people in this particular use case, right? So I think it's one of those things where it's not that there's no use case for it. It's that you, given that you cannot trust that anyone will properly, leash the thing, which no one will do, then yeah, that it's like the primary use case for it in terms of, again, what anyone's going to want to do with it is like, put anybody's face saying anything you want and then spreading it all over the internet, right? And so it's like, it is calamitous as much as it might be useful in a variety of contexts. It doesn't really, it's like because you can't separate the two in any clean, meaningful way, right? Then
to me, the use cases. Yeah, I think the use cases in something like, again, like this is assuming that hallucination problems and other things get mitigated, or because of course, like people are wrong, right? Like a doctor.
The
can
thing is
call
that's
you,
a separate problem from this, right? Because this is about let
me finish my sentence though. But like the use cases for this are like there are positive ones that are possible when it comes to say like tutoring, right? So if you are able to like speak with something like this in real time and have what looks like like a video call, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then that can be more relatable and engaging than just like watching a YouTube video on a topic, or like you can ask follow-up questions, and it's like one of the benefits of something like an AI model that you can interact with is that it has infinite patience.
Yes.
Like it's not going to get annoyed with you telling it that you don't understand something and that you want to repeat something because it doesn't have anything else to do. It doesn't have another class to teach or whatever, right? So same thing with like a nursing thing where like if it calls you in a video call and explains your test results to you, and you can just ask as many follow-up questions as you want, and it's fine. It'll just stay on the line and happily answer everything.
So now here's
assuming that it works.
Well, yeah, okay.
Right?
Because this is what is like increasingly pissing me off about all of AI, which is that there's something it's really good at already, which is scams. It's excellent at scams.
Yes. Well, that's was the other half of my.
There's something it's terrible at currently, which is giving you accurate information, right? Because it's not what they're for. That's not how they work, right? So all of the promises of AI and like here are the use cases that are basically the same thing it was for NFTs, which is like, imagine a future where we've solved all the problems that make it not actually useful today, right?
But I think this is different though, because in the case of say like reporting your test results or something like that, it is in my mind, like it's likely that right now it is as accurate as a person calling you.
If it's
right, like
why would you think that that's true? Like
people make mistakes like all the time, and I don't know how many times you've interacted with someone in the medical profession, and they are busy. They don't give a shit. They just glance at your stuff and go, I don't know, and you don't really get any.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But do you think that the robots are already better than that average?
In some cases, yeah.
Is there any evidence for that? I've never seen any evidence that
they cited in that research paper. Yeah, they cited in that research paper. Basically, a lot,
and they're getting better all the time. But they're already pretty accurate in a lot of these domains. It kind of makes me paper. Yeah, this kind of makes me think of things like self-driving cars, which are still like not good, right? Yeah. But in this weird way, we have this standard for self-driving cars, which is they have to be perfect before we would ever consider having them be legal on the road. But we're totally fine with human beings driving on the road who just fuck things up all the time. So like we have a different standard for.
Well, but this is also because of liability questions, right? Because if a random robot kills you or gives you bad medical advice,
then it's the robot manufacturer or whatever.
Yeah, because I don't actually buy the idea that like the reason we don't have self-driving cars is because we require too much of them, right? I think it's because first they're not actually good enough, but second because we haven't solved the legal questions about liability, and we don't like there's no such thing as like guidelines about what has to be required of a self-driving car for it to be allowed, right? Like there's no.
But this is why here's where I'm on the same page as you, which is like because all these legitimate uses are essentially large scale things, right? So like let's say you got a company that like has this even, let's say just hypothetically it has the perfect nurse type of a thing, right? That can like interface with patients, and it actually does a really good job of reporting information much better than a person does, and like a typical person does, right? And all that stuff. But if this one company now has like 10 million of these AI nurse agents interacting with people every day, then you're right that like there's a huge legal framework of like what happens with liability, with mistakes and all that stuff, because it's all concentrated into one company. There's also the problems of bias, right? And like it would if the one company has all these same AI models interacting with people, then whatever bias is present in those models will hit every person who interacts with those models in the same way, right? So there's all these kind of weird like overarching problems that have to be solved for things to be deployed in a useful way at scale.
Well, but also
whereas scammers don't have this problem.
Yeah, that's right.
Like they don't care about liability or accuracy, and they'll just deploy stuff in whatever way they can.
I think it's what you
but even in this quote unquote legitimate use case, which I'm still having trouble buying, but even in that case, like again, we're talking about a utopian kind of a thing that isn't what our reality is. Because what's not going to happen, assuming we even did have imaginary nurses that were able to give good real medical advice, assuming that was true, the result is not that we're like, oh, thank God now our overworked nurses can be less overworked. The result is now they all get fired and we don't have any human nurses anymore except the minimum required to do the actual physical work, which is already what we have, right? But people will just fire even more, right?
Yep.
So like,
well,
is that actually
it's a three body problem, right? In the sense that like as one thing changes, it changes other things, and because
my argument is that the net effect, I would say, which would be really hard to argue, is like actually good. You can like say there's a specific facet of it is good, but I think it's really hard to argue that like
I think
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
My 2 cents.
Which is why, in my opinion, there's no real use case for this, because every use case has so many downsides and consequences.
My take is that regardless of your consideration about use cases, that it is an inevitability on the horizon because of how things work. So it's kind of like it doesn't matter really if you don't approve of the amount of hallucination present in models, or the like stealing of people's faces and making them say things, because it's just like it's coming. So it's happening. More like,
what is that an argument for?
It's an argument.
It's more, I think same thing
on the backside because it's coming.
That's sure, that's a different.
Like you're not wrong.
Yeah. But my point is just this is evil technology that shouldn't exist, and Microsoft shouldn't be investing in it. And I would also disagree with just the idea that like it's coming, because the only reason it's coming is because we have enterprises the scale of Microsoft throwing $1 billion at the problem. It's like the Manhattan Project, right? Like that wasn't coming, right? That was a concerted effort of 50,000 people and like the entire weight of the U.S. government to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Like these things aren't inevitable. Somebody has to make them, and they're actually incredibly difficult to make, like extremely difficult to make.
Yeah,
even just even like ChatGPT,
like you're gonna get one in the soup. Currently.
I don't disagree. I'm just not sure what that statement does. Like that's true that's going to happen. My point is just that it's evil and it shouldn't. But
yeah, well, this kind of comes to like the kind of endpoint of all this Vasa 1 model stuff, which is, to me, there's kind of like there's 2 points here. One is that, and this is something that people have been saying a lot with all the AI stuff, which is like this is the worst it's going to be, in the sense that
you mean the worst quality of the AI,
the worst quality in terms of like how powerful these things are. Like they're getting exponentially better all the time. Like it was, I think a year ago ish, that like Mid-Journey started actually making like coherent images from a prompt, right? And now we've got things like OpenAI's Sora, which can make these like big video clips. We've got Udio that can make really, really high quality, convincing music. We got this, it's been just like a year and a half since ChatGPT first like popped onto the scene, right? It's like the pace is just crazy. And everybody knows this, but nobody knows what to do about it. It's like in the case of this Vasa 1 thing, Microsoft, they announced that they have this thing. They showed it off. They like published a bunch of research papers about like evaluating its efficacy and in various benchmarks and stuff. And then they said something along the lines of, we're not making this available to the public because we don't know. We want to figure out how to make it available for the use cases that we think are positive, but keep it locked down for everything else, right? I'm just like, because even if they did that, in 6 months, there's going to be there's going to be 20 or 30 more versions of this, some of which will even potentially be open source, right? Yeah. Because it's going to be that's just what keeps happening.
Yeah, well, but I think it is going to be longer before we have something at the par that like Microsoft's able to pull off.
Right.
Because again, the sheer resources required. This isn't one of those like, oh, if you can crack it once, it's just a matter of like the next person to crack it too. It's like the reason they could crack it once is because they have Microsoft's engineering team who are the top of the field, right? And also Microsoft's physical and financial resources, which are unlimited. So yeah, so I don't disagree, but like, because now you can see what like a new benchmark looks like, right? And there are other enterprises that could potentially do it. But this isn't one of those things where it's like some, rando who like is into machine learning is be like, oh, now I'm going to go do it. And they go do it in their basement.
Yeah.
Like it's not
garage Silicon Valley stuff. This is top tier corporate stuff at this point.
Yeah. And this stuff will get easier to start making in your garage as long as you've got a supercomputer in there. Right. Because that's,
not necessarily. I mean, in a weird way, like the open source side of this stuff is essentially just like 6 to 8 months behind the cutting edge.
That's because its origin is all in the open source stuff. So it's all the same technology, right? It's the difference is basically scale, which is just that people who are doing like the reason that OpenAI like became what it is because they were doing the same stuff at scale. It's the same underlying technology that came out of academia and was developed by scientists, right? It's just that they were like, well, what if we had $1 billion and then we're working on this problem, right?
Yeah, but a huge amount of that cost comes from the machine learning with like the reinforcement from human feedback side of things, like just hiring tens of thousands of people to continuously like train these new models with bigger and bigger parameters, right? That and like the cloud compute. Cost because the limiting resource costs here are basically the human cost of the experts, and that gets cheaper over time as the stuff becomes available because the experts already did the work, right? So that part's true. But you're saying the other part is getting access to the data because these systems only get better with ever larger amounts of good, properly annotated data, and that part has to be done by people, right? And that part is extremely expensive. And also that's like one of the part of the puzzle where like the people who are doing this at scale are not making that available, right? They are not giving people access to, here's the training set. Now you could add more stuff to our training set and, make a better version or whatever. That stuff's all staying locked up because of course it's easier to get away with the stuff that you stole. And if people can't see what that stuff was,
So this is all plenty dark, but I had a product idea. Okay. Come out of this. Yeah. Just now, which is, those scary movies where someone gets like a Polaroid, right? They take a picture and there's like some creepy ghost shit showing up in said photo. Mm-hmm. Presumably, you tell me how hard this would be, but presumably you could essentially embed or attach that thing to Wi-Fi in some way such that like you could give a Polaroid to someone looking like a normal camera, but actually it's like a ghost cam. And so what it does is it takes the picture originally, right? And then inserts a spooky ghost in there.
To the environment.
It uses machine learning to add spooky shit to every picture you take.
Takes your own face and then puts it on like a spooky ghost or whatever, right? And then prints it out.
What? That is a legitimate use case.
I'm telling you, hotcakes.
This has all been worth it.
Someone make me a ghost Polaroid. I want one.
That's the thing is like all of the legitimate use cases that don't have lots of their downsides are this kind of thing, which I would just call a gimmick, right? Which is like, that's fun and amusing, right? Which like it was the same deal with NFTs. It was like, which is the annoying part because NFTs like aren't even useful. It's not even the absence of a use case; it's that they can't.
They're just nothing.
They're also not even fun.
They're not fun. They're nothing, right? And AI is just weird because like its use cases are like almost universally evil. Those are the easy use cases. Or like, but
NFTs don't do anything.
Yeah, it's because it's doing stuff. Because like with NFTs, you have to trick people into getting involved, right? With AI, the AI can trick people.
Yeah, I was gonna say, with the power of AI, you can really sell those NFTs.
You can outsource.
Yeah, it's
all weird.
And things are moving faster and faster because they kind of build on themselves, you know, like something else that you're kind of seeing with some of the smaller or like the laggards in the AI space is in a weird way, they can make models, they can make smaller models using the bigger models because instead of using human, like if somebody wants to make a model that mimics ChatGPT, then they just need to know what kinds of things ChatGPT would say in response to a prompt, which is how you train models. So they can use a larger model to train a smaller model without hiring a lot of people, which is also like things like that are why the open source community is able to not like they can't stay at the cutting edge, but they can
miniaturize.
They can replicate what's happening in that space pretty easily after some time. So
it's like cats when out of the Bing bag, used to use Google search behind the scene.
Bing just straight up grabbed Google results and published them, which that was a bold move.
I think otherwise the thing to remember, because also we've been seeing recently that a lot of the really hyped AI stuff, surprise, turned out to be
bullshit,
at least to some extent. But like the reminder with all this stuff is that anytime you're seeing a tech demo, this isn't even just about AI. Anytime you're seeing a tech demo, it is a lie, straight up and down. This is different because we talk about how like marketing is a kind of lying, right? But ethical marketing is you're telling a truth with using the lies, right? Because you can't capture the whole truth and deliver it to somebody when you're trying to tell them about something that you've made that you think they should buy, right? Because that stuff is too complicated. So you're trying to figure out how do you distill it down into like the truths that actually matter, that make a person interested. And if you do that ethically, then the lie that you've told was actually just a truth that got the person what they wanted. Everybody's on the same page and everybody's happy, right? Tech demos are really interesting because they start with the assumption that what you're seeing happen is like the technology doing the thing, right? Yeah. And that's never what's happening.
Like the first iPhone demo. Completely. It literally didn't work. And they just like had a pre-scripted thing of like push this button at this time and this thing will come up. And it was like instead of interfaces and in some cases it was just like screenshots, like pictures of what the interface will look like. And
they made it so that the bars showing how strong or single strength whatever were just always maxed out. AT&T, who they launched with, brought a mobile tower like right outside the building to make sure that it had maximum connectivity possible because they were having trouble getting it to stay connected. Right.
That's so funny.
And the thing is they solved all these problems.
Yeah, they did solve them. Right. But it wasn't inevitable that they would. And this is how tech demos are presented. They're presented as like, this is what you will get because you don't need to worry about the problems that we're dealing with. They don't even know about them because it's inevitable that we will fix them, right?
Yeah. Well, so really for example, also like the fact that when you're making a product, you don't fully finish the product before you bother checking to see if anybody wants it.
Yeah, because there are other goals here too. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's where the nuance comes into play, right? Because we saw this with Google's early. They had that early demo of some kind of like real time, supposedly AI. Think of it like watching you do stuff, right? And they didn't annotate it to explain that actually this is not literally what's happening. This is like our dream end result of the tech that we're building, but to build it we actually like cut the scene together because there's actually a lag and blah blah blah, right? So they presented it as if this is what the tech is doing. Like it's the same thing with like the whatever that OpenAI's movie making Sora, right? Yeah. Same deal there, right? Because you still can't use that yet, right? Mm-hmm. And when they put it out, you have to remember they're showing you the best possible outcome of using this.
They're not just going to like type in 3 prompts and just grab whatever it spits out.
And so we don't actually know what like the average kind of result, like the result that you would get looks like, right? Same deal with this evil Microsoft face technology that we just talked about earlier, right?
Yeah.
Like, same like you're gonna see the best possible case scenario, but it might even be worse than that because it might be modified in post to again, and it doesn't have to be because the people are trying to trick you. It could be because they truly believe it's inevitable that they fix the problems, right? But because you can't tell the difference when you're looking at a tech demo, when you don't have access to it itself, right? You can't tell the difference between what the thing is actually capable of and what they imagine it will be capable of. And AI chronically lives in that space of like, everybody thinks it's inevitable that it gets to the point that their demos are showing. Like everybody does in the space. And so what we're always seeing is like the best case possible scenarios that either are a subset of the scenarios that are actually happening or aren't even at all because they're like the imagined future thing. So when you're looking at the stuff and evaluating it, if you can't use it yet, be extremely skeptical.
But that's the weird thing, right? Because in so many cases, like I think Udio is a pretty good example where like if somebody showed me a demo of Udio, I'd be like, bullshit.
Yeah.
Like there's no way that you can.
Just because it turned out that you can, and it actually is good, doesn't mean you were wrong to evaluate it as bullshit because most things that presented like that would have been bullshit. So this is the point of skepticism, right? You're not disbelieving things for the sake of doing it. You're not disbelieving things even though they might be true or whatever. It's basically you're saying like, until I have evidence that the thing is real, I'm going to, it's not even about disbelieving it actively. It's just you don't believe it also, right? So
well, you don't have any reason to believe it.
Yeah, right? Like if I saw the Udio thing, I also would be like, that sounds like bullshit, right?
Yeah, like there's no way you could just type in a sentence and get and get that coherent of a piece of music.
Yeah, and so my argument is basically it's actually fine and good that your first response to the thing is, oh, that's probably bullshit, because again, it probably is, right? And then it's the whole idea of like strong opinions loosely held, right? Which is the idea of like when faced with actual evidence of something, that's when you say, oh, like if you're willing to believe something when there's evidence for it. If you're not, you're a conspiracy theorist, right? So once you see evidence, like that's when you believe it. Before you see actual evidence, you have to make sure that you're evaluating it as skeptically as you can. But especially in spaces like all of tech, this isn't even about AI.
Yeah, it's always been
tech is a grifter's paradise, right? Because all of the tools and stuff is imaginary, and the money is insane and really weird, and like people that nobody understands how everything works. So you can make almost any claim you want to, and people start throwing money at you, right? And so it's just grifter's paradise. And so anytime you're evaluating anything in any of the tech space, your default assumption should be, this is at least to some extent bullshit. Maybe not completely bullshit, but at least to some extent, this is probably not good.
Yeah. So like the Cybertruck.
Yeah.
Although
it is real.
Yeah, it does exist. I mean, one of the things that you would think that, they didn't, like they just did a recall. They just did a full recall because the accelerator pedal gets stuck, among other things.
No, because it's even the accelerator pedal can come off, like the top part of it.
It can't, but it does both. It can come off or get stuck.
But when it slides, because like the reason it gets stuck though is because like the front, like in front of where your foot is, right? There's like a little like kind of an indent, as in, so you can imagine like if the pedal was extended further, like if it was longer, then it would get stuck in that indent, right?
Like
so the
wedged
problem,
in there.
Yeah, it gets wedged in there, that it can't come back up. So the problem is that the top part of the pedal is basically slid on like from the front, right? There's like an extra piece, which is the part you're then stepping on. That's like the nice piece rather than just the bare metal like stick, There's like slides over the stick, but because it slides on that way, it can slide back off by pushing it. So the direction you're pushing with your foot is the direction.
It's how you take it off.
It's how you take it off, right? And if it comes off because it slides on, then it's still attached, right? It's just, so it's in essence, you just make that pedal longer and longer until it falls off, right? but if before that happens, it gets wedged in the front of the car,
such a joke,
then it's still attached to the pedal.
Yeah. And
now wedged in the front, and now you have this long ass wedged into the front pedal that is floored.
Yeah, it's just stuck all the way down.
It's just stuck.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with the Cybertruck stuff, but man, it's been just a hilarious clown show this week of like, it can chop your fingers off. Like
They only sold like 400 of them. How do you have this many problems?
I think they've sold like 3,800 now or something like that. Because that was how many they recalled. Was all 3,800 that that are currently out.
Even still, that's crazy.
If you're looking for a good time, just look up some videos of Cybertruck review, because it's just shit like it has a front trunk, because it's electric, so it doesn't have an engine up there. So, like a lot of electric cars, they use that front area for storage space. Well, because it's a Tesla product, they're like, what's the dumbest possible way we could close and open this frunk? How about all electric remote only, right? So like you can't just like open it manually or whatever. Right. You got to like hit a button and it opens, and hit a button and it closes. But when it closes, it has no sensors for whether it is closing on something, like if your hand is in there. And the Cybertruck is made out of these like stainless steel plates that only have sharp edges. Okay. So like I watched a video where, for starters, some dudes were peeling a carrot on the door of the Cybertruck because of how sharp the edge of the door is. And then they were like, okay, what happens? So then they took 4 carrots side by side to kind of like represent like human fingers, right? And they put them in the like at the edge of where the frunk closes, and they hit the button. That fucker just chopped those carrots right in half.
Dude.
No problem. And then they put an aluminum can in there, and it chopped that in.
That's horrifying.
So, it doesn't have a rear view mirror. It's got a rear camera that becomes completely opaque in bad weather. You literally can't see behind you in bad weather. Its headlights aim up. They aim up directly into the eyes of other drivers and not down at the road. It's just like thing after thing. But, I feel like, at least personally, speaking of like tech things being bullshit, right? As soon as I saw the Cybertruck unveiled for the first time, I was like, this is just a train wreck from day one.
Wasn't that also the thing where, because they unveiled it and he like threw a ball at the window, and the window broke, and I was like, yeah, because this. I don't know if you guys remember this, but he was like, the windows are bulletproof because they are, how did he put it? They are transparent metal.
What?
He's like, it's not actually glass, or he called it like transparent metal glass or some weird. It's just glass. It's just regular glass. So again, it's just total bullshit. So as with nowadays, anything coming out of Tesla, lots of this AI stuff, like have a really healthy amount of skepticism. If something seems too good to be true, assume that it is. And right up until the moment you can get your actual hands on it, because it's probably nonsense.
And even then, don't be the first. This is not a good time to be an early adopter. I think there was a period of time when it was actually like fun and interesting to be an early adopter, because like you got burned on occasion, but like because things were less hype driven, then there was a good chance that you could be like, oh, I can count on this company who's always delivered good stuff, right? To like that this thing will be good, so I want to get it on day one and see this cool new thing, right? Like I think that used to be true. Or maybe it's actually just the case that there's just so much stuff coming from random companies that are brand new now. Maybe that's what the real thing is, But
like, it's probably in some of these spaces, it's easier and easier to get a new product up and running and out onto the market, especially if it's digital only, right? Because it's just code. You don't have to manufacture it and distribute it, and
But even if it's not, if you basically say, oh, we're doing AI stuff, right? Then the money just appears. It just comes out of VC pockets. It's wild.
Sure does. For now. Yeah. We'll see what happens in the near future. Now, Sam, you want to talk about a little bit of parenting stuff?
Yeah.
A bit of life stuff.
You talk about like training models, right? In the AI space. So it's been, I haven't talked too much about dad stuff on the podcast, but I did want to share this because there's a bunch of stuff about, either myself or about Diana that as adults, and then thinking about yourself, you're like, oh, that's like a behavior that it's not like a deep behavior. It's like a learned behavior, right? I think a lot of us think a lot of aspects of your personality are, mitigated or enhanced by whatever your childhood was, right? And one such one with Diana has always been this, there's kind of a physical comedy aspect.
For listeners who don't know, Diana's your wife.
Yes. There's a
not your
wife
daughter.
and the mother of my child. So there's a physical comedy aspect to how she moves through the world, which can be occasionally very brash, right? So sort of like sort of a get out of my way sort of attitude. And I think it's best summed up in a very simple circumstances. Like say I'm standing in front of the sink and she needs to get to the sink. Then like my approach, what I would do is like sort of tap a person or like very gently like
Just wait.
Or just wait. Dinah's approach typically is much more like you get a firm hand on you that is firmly pushing you out of the way, right? And the joke we have is
I'm walking here.
Yeah, just like it's like a disrespect sort of a vibe, right? Like get out of my face. So
I think it's that Boston upbringing that.
Yeah, it must be.
Yeah.
So I've always made fun of her for this because it like I just find it hilarious and unnecessary, most of the time, but also just very funny. And what's been a real bit of comedy is realizing how deep in the brain that behavior is, because this baby who's like a year old now does the same thing and Dinah's never done that. Dinah's very sweet to this baby, never shoves the baby out of the way. You know what I mean? But this baby, you'll just be, carrying her around and she wants to like get something over there and she'll just like full force push your face out of the way. And with a level of, again, there's a sense of disrespect involved here that I think is critical, the underlying element.
You're no longer a person. You're an obstacle.
You're an obstacle.
Get the fuck out of here.
And it's like, it's so ridiculous. It's so funny that it started happening. And then Diana asked me, she was like, am I actually that rude? Is that what that is? And I was like, I mean, yeah, but I was, it gives, I think for me, at times, sure. It's giving me a lot of, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of clarity there. So it's like, oh, that's a very deep, that's a built-in behavior, right? It's not coming from any like particular learned thing later. It's like, it's just showing up in the way you interact with space, right? On the most basic level. Cause again, like this baby's just,
well, it's a claiming of space, right? Cause you're just like, this is my space.
Get out of the way.
Get out of the way.
But I also think that, I think there's some behaviors that we would call learned, but I would even maybe frame them as unlearned.
Yes.
Because it's probably the case that like a lot of people have that instinct of like, I'm trying to go somewhere. I'm just going to fucking go there.
Yeah. I mean, that honestly sounds like toddler, like a thing that a toddler
That's probably
do, right?
that may just be
like,
the
I don't
default,
know toddlers.
Right?
I don't know a lot of toddlers.
But we know
like
it feels toddlers and they don't do that. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's where it's that whole, it's like, I think that's a particular personality.
Yeah, did they? But they got corrected away from it already. Or
yeah,
like
you never know. Yeah, because also I think about how like I have an instinctive rage response when somebody tries to stop me from doing something. We're like, and again, it's not just about like, oh, I'm trying to like pull into a parking spot, but somebody else got there first. I don't give a shit about that. It's more that if somebody's preventing me from doing something for no particularly good reason. You know what I mean? Like, have you ever had somebody just like stand in your way and you're trying to get around them and they just think it's funny that they're blocking your path or shit like that, Like basically people are just like preventing you from doing something, not maliciously, but kind of to troll you or whatever. Like that kind of a thing just throws me into just a hyper rage mode.
And I'm sure that's a built-in, you know what I mean? Like that's a very deep.
It's built in, like it's an emotional response. We're like, you don't get to decide your emotions, It's like something that I've had to work on my whole life is
it's not actually flying into that.
It's
rage.
not doing anything, not doing anything about the fact that I'm feeling that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like I think there's some behaviors that are learned and then some are unlearned. Like and you can't really change how you feel about the situation, but you can over time learn to channel that differently.
You train your emotional response like a bit, into one direction or another. But
so what I'm wondering with this is like, do you think there's an emotional component to it where it's like, I got to get through here, and there's like a sense of like internal urgency to it that is uncontrollable, or is it just like?
I think it's more the whole. It's like. There is a sort of it seems because of like the disrespect feeling. That's how I frame it, because I don't know how else to describe it, but it's like, because
you're just being pushed aside.
Really just push aside. But there's a variety of ways you can push someone aside, right? It's a very expressive action, right? Moving someone to get to something. There can be a very gentle one,
Well, and it's also, are you moving them fully out of the way so that they can no longer do the thing that they were doing, or are you just kind of squeezing in?
So that you can both. Right? I think Dinah, and apparently this baby's format is just moving the person out of the way.
Just take the space.
Just take a space
for yourself.
And I don't know exactly what like mentally is going on there so much as I mean, I've asked Diana about
That's
it.
just-
She's
that's just
like, I don't know.
colonialism,
It's just
right?
I just go there. I just got to go there. I'm going there. So
Well, I think that's the description of the mental space, which is that it doesn't take into account the other person as an obstacle, right? Yeah. Which is something like which I can see as like, a personality trait that a person can have. And it's one of those that over time, some people will like learn to recognize that that's going on. Right. Because that's different than like, you can't just like become able to be like, oh yeah, that is a person and they might be doing stuff. Right.
right. Yep.
As in like you can't make that happen internally, but that's where like the external behavior control that we learn and build up over time comes in.
Yeah, if somebody keeps saying you like, hey, quit doing that, right? Then eventually you got to be like, maybe I should think about stopping doing it.
Right.
But yeah, so it's all about, what is it in your environment or whatever that reinforces certain things or.
But there's also how much self-monitoring, right? Because I personally am like self-monitoring just fucking constantly because that was what I basically had to in order to be a person that people like could respond to as a person, as an autistic person, so like I'm self-monitoring constantly, but I can see a case where if you didn't have to and didn't,
why would you, man?
no, why would that? Yeah. Why? Because it's a thing that takes constant conscious effort or don't care to, one or the other. Yeah. But it takes constant conscious effort to basically be, it's not even working against like your natural, whatever it is you're going to do. Right. But it's basically a monitoring of it so that you're constantly being like, does that make sense? Does that make sense? Does this make sense? Right. And I could definitely see like for different sort of contexts where you're growing up, how you're being parented, different schooling scenarios and so on, and different kinds of personality and kinds of brain types and so on. Like you could find yourself in a place where you just like mostly didn't have to monitor yourself. Right. With that
and
like
also
higher
not
level, just
monitor those other people in a way that you had to care about, right?
Yeah, where you can then end up in a place where you just do kind of do stuff, right?
Yep.
Well, everybody lands on different defaults unless something else intervenes. Like, okay, this is kind of seems unrelated, but it just was fascinating to me, and it comes back. So we had a really interesting conversation in my WoW guild on Tuesday night about keybinds. Okay, because this one guy was like, he had this one button that he kept clicking with his mouse. And we have this philosophy like in WoW, it's like you should hotkey everything because it's faster, right? And people were like, hey man, you should keybind that thing. Stop clicking that. It's important. And his response was like, well, I can't. I already have 40 keybinds. I don't know how I could possibly get an extra one. I just don't have space. Right?
There's a lot of keybinds.
And so I came back and I was like, well, I have 70 keybinds and I have room for more. So I think you can find one more. Yeah, so let's figure it out. Right. So we started looking, and then ultimately the conversation ended up where it usually does with these, which is hand positions. Because some people will say like, oh, well, I can't use control as a modifier key because I can't reach it. Or some people only use alt as a modifier key because if you say like, let's say you've got like Q and E keybound. Well, if you can add alt in there, then you can go alt Q, alt E, and you got 2 more keybinds, right? So modifier keys just like double the number of keybinds you can have. So personally, like my hand rests on like my middle finger's on W, my pinky's on shift, my thumb's on spacebar. Okay. That's like in my mind, a typical WASD kind of like hand position. As we were talking through some of this keybind stuff, there's this big debate appeared amongst a bunch of different people in the conversation about which keys are easy to reach and which keys are not. Eventually,
where your hand is.
Yeah,
Also
eventually
how
a
big
bunch
your
of us.
hand is, right?
Yeah, eventually a bunch of us posted pictures of our resting hand position on our keyboard, and I saw the wildest shit that I have ever seen. Like one person was like, "Well, I can't really hit spacebar because my thumb is on C."
Thumb is on C.
And I was like, what? And then somebody else was talking about how like the F keys are easy to reach. And then they post a screenshot and their hand is like in this claw grip where their fingers are like tucked underneath so that like their fingernail is on W instead of the bottom of their finger, and some people have their hand like rotated at 45 degrees so that like they can't really hit shift like any of the modifier keys because it's like under the base of their palm, And so what's weird about that is like we learned how to type in school, right? You got your fingers on the home row and like there's a specific hand position that gets reinforced for typing. Well, for gaming, there isn't, right? Like there's no.
This is where I have a hot take though, which is WASD is complete bullshit and never should have been invented because it provides no benefit from ESDF. Right?
Yeah.
The keys are it's the same fucking position. The keys are in the same place, right? And then your hand doesn't move from its typing position. The design of a keyboard, and you can say they're not perfect. So, right. But the design of a keyboard is designed around the idea that you're trying to be able to reach all of the keys on the keyboard. So it's designed in a particular way. Your hands go in a particular spot. We all learned how to type, putting our hand on the home row with our fingers on the right. So for a reason, which is that's where your physical human body matches the design of the tool that sends inputs to your computer, right? Is hands on home row, typing like a typist, right? So the whole idea that I don't know who invented. I remember OG Half-Life had WASD. I don't know if they were the first or if it came before that. But at the time, I was just like, oh, okay. And I just did that. Right. And now that's become, and that is now my expectation when I play something. But there's no good reason for that because
I disagree.
What is the benefit?
The benefit is mostly that pinkies suck. Okay. They're not very long and they're not that dexterous. So if you slide your hand to the right so that you're on ESDF instead of WSD, then your pinky is still kind of resting on shift or control or whatever, but it's kind of hard to tuck your pinky under and hit Z or whatever, right? So I don't think it's that bad.
Wait, are you hitting Z with your pinky when you're on WASD? Are you a fucking contortionist?
No.
Okay.
All I hit is shift, control, tab, those kinds of things. Because my pinky doesn't do much because it's a pinky and it sucks.
Right? My point though is that well, that may be true. If you shift your hand, if you keep your hands where they normally are, you haven't lost access to the number of keys, right?
Yeah, correct. But it might be a little bit more of a reach for your pinky
for the same
control
keys.
or something.
But the whole point of key binds is you can put whatever fucking key you want because the keys don't mean anything. They're just an input, right?
Yeah, but I want lots of modifiers. So I want to be able to easily reach control and shift so that I can get a lot more out of the rest of the keys. So that's largely what my pinky does. But point being,
okay. So for you, basically the idea is we shift left because now pinkies have easier access for people with smaller hands, I guess.
Yeah. Without having to do a bit of a reach, But I don't understand how people could hit Alt because, man, that's a thumb tuck. No matter how you slice it. Yeah. Alt is a thumb tuck and I get a cramp, But again, unless your hand's at a 45-degree angle, then your thumb is basically resting on Alt, which some of my friends play like that, right? So when it comes to this idea of just landing on some kind of a default that makes sense to you kind of organically just based on what you're doing, and unless something else comes in and makes you change that thing that you're doing, you just kind of keep doing it that way because why wouldn't you just, if it's working, it's working. And also you don't know what the range of possible outcomes are. Right. Mm-hmm. So you don't know whether there's whether there's a better way to do it that would give you better outcomes.
Well, I think you're also not even conscious of what it is that you're doing. Right. And because we all had probably this, I don't remember taking typing class, but I know we did it, or computers, whatever the fuck they call it.
It was just called computers.
Yeah. And we were also we had typing programs that we used at home, and stuff. Right. So and I know that we type better than average significantly, right? But we also spend
faster at least.
Yeah, faster. I think more accurately, but we spend all day, every day typing stuff, right? Yeah, we have basically since we were children, right? And so we had pretty good instruction in typing, and also type constantly, and it's basically our job. And we also take pride in doing that aspect, every aspect of our job, effectively, right? But that's not average, right? The average person probably had less early exposure to proper typing form, to actual typing classes, that kind of stuff, right? Which is, and then day to day, they didn't necessarily, they sort of ended up learning some typing behavior and habits, and that kind of stopped there, right? And that's just part of how they use it. They don't think about it. It's just whatever the natural thing is. So I think a lot of this is also
it's not that common for people to say, let me take a step back and change everything about how I'm doing this, just in case.
But especially when it's something that you don't think about, because the whole point of being an actual touch typist is that you don't look at the keyboard, you're not thinking about it, your hands are just doing stuff, right? But that doesn't mean they're all doing the same stuff. It just means that they're doing it automatically, right? And so you'll see I remember when my wife first got a split keyboard, she was like, oh shit, she just suddenly realized that like that one, I can't remember what the situation was, but it was like one of her fingers was crossing the boundary to the other side, you know?
It was
like,
probably B or something like that.
it was
That's a
something
pretty
like
common
that where she
one.
was like,
Yeah.
and now all of a sudden that key wasn't there anymore because the keyboard was split in half, right? Because when the typing that she'd eventually like learned and became ingrained, that touch typing, because it was always on a physical keyboard that was the same shape, wasn't split in half, right? Then it allowed her to like learn an alternative way of doing certain aspects of touch typing, which she then, you know, maintained forever until all of a sudden she's like, oh no, like it literally doesn't work anymore, right? And so like I think you're seeing this with like all these people playing WoW and stuff, right? Is like, it's going to seem insane when you look at what they're doing and you'd be like, that doesn't make any sense, right? But it's what's happening. Like
It's fine.
it's not even that it's fine. It's just that it's not that thought went into it, right? It's
It organically
happened as
evolved,
as a kind of an outgrowth of first learning how to type and then second, or I guess maybe first learning how to play WASD games, right? But either way of like learning, having your brain and hands just automatically figure something out over time that then becomes just how you do that thing, that then you're like adding stuff onto, but always in a way where like every new bit starts out conscious until it becomes habit, right? As you're like learning new hotkeys and stuff, right? But so there's only those moments where you learn the next thing that you'd spend any time consciously thinking about it. Then it gets tucked away too, right? But it's all built originally on like whatever fucking house of cards, you know, like you started with from when you first started learning this stuff. And so I think it is one of those funny things is that is a surprise is that I think of touch typing as being like a specific thing, right? Hands are a specific position, fingers go to certain spots, like that kind of stuff, right? But the reality is that like any two people, there's a really good chance they have at least one difference in how they hit certain keys, right?
Well, what's also I found kind of interesting about when it comes to making changes to these things, I'm not sure what the word is for this, but there's a two-step problem that people will have where if you say like, oh, well, have you tried doing this differently like this? And immediately, if that conflicts with something that the person also has control over, they just won't do it. So like a good example is like in WoW, C is defaults to your character window. If you want to look at your gear or your stats or whatever, you press C, right? But that's a really good hotkey for like combat stuff.
Yeah, you don't need to
because it's right next to WASD, right? And so almost nobody that I have spoken to uses C for combat stuff because it's just a defaults to your character, right? So whenever I tell people, hey, you should try binding C to something that you actually hit during combat because like it's a great button, it's right there. And the immediate response is always, but then how do I open my character window?
Yeah, some other key button.
And I'm like, just rebind that to something else, right? Yeah. So like I bound it to H, which is what Guild Wars 2 has for your character window.
But the thing is, if you're creating problems in order to solve a problem, then that's always going to make people a little uncomfortable, right?
Right, because if you say like, if you do A, then you can do B, right?
Yeah.
Then people are like, yeah, but
you're also
that means I got to do two things now.
Yeah, because this is why change management is so hard. Period. Right. It's like organizational change and this kind of stuff, right? But like in this kind of a case, you're asking somebody to do two things. One is unlearn a habit, right? Yep. And the other one is learn two new habits, right?
Yep. And that's too much.
It's actually a big ask. And it is funny because like in a context where it's like, well, we're playing video games, right? Then it's a really good demonstration of the fact that like it doesn't actually matter what the downstream consequences are of the change, like how good or bad or important the change is, right? Because you can easily make an argument that like, well, it's a video game. Who cares if like you spend a little bit of time being temporarily worse at it, right?
And you can't exactly draw a line from like, you know, if somebody dies in a boss fight or something, you can't say, well, if you had bound your C key to your health potion.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It's hard on both sides.
You can't say that. There's no way to know that.
But even if you did, like, you're like, oh, like I might die a little bit less if I bind this key or whatever, right? But if it doesn't sound like that big of a problem, but I think my point is it doesn't even matter if it sounded like it was a big problem and if it sounded like it was something you could solve. If it's going to have to go through this period of change, then you're going to be infinitely biased towards not doing it.
Yeah.
Just always.
Change is never
no matter what the benefits, no matter what the costs are, no matter what the anything are, your first response is going to be no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's often framed as like I may not be perfect, but I get the job done. You know, like I've gotten by like how I do things has gotten me this far, so it must be good enough, right? And so one of the things that you have to kind of angle towards to get out of that way of thinking is like, sure, but do you want to go farther? Do you want to improve, or do you just want to stay where you're at? Because if you make 0 changes to anything, then you will stay where you're at. That's how everything works, right? You're not expanding capabilities. And so if you reframe it as, I never want to achieve more than I currently have, that's an alternative framing of I'm not going to make any changes to anything that I do, right? And if you can kind of think about it in those terms,
but I
then
think
it
even
makes
if
it a
you
little
do,
bit easier to motivate
I
yourself
think that
to try some changes.
I think that could help, but I think even if you do, I still think it mostly doesn't matter because you're basically what you're saying is like I know because I guess actually maybe just to be more like concrete, there's a million things that I know if I did those things, I would be better, or like my life would be better, right? And I'm not doing that. There's a million things that I know that I could do, right? And that I know would make me less, stagnant.
That's always true, though. But exactly. is there at least one thing that you're doing differently now than you were doing a month ago?
Oh, sure. There's tons of stuff that I'm doing differently all the time.
So you're trying to you got to pick.
But
your
my
battles.
point is, any one thing though is what is like. It doesn't actually, even if you have like strong motivation, even if you want to be better, even if all those things are true, right? Like. Nobody's life comes down to like the thing that's the most important right now is this hotkey in World of Warcraft, right? Like that's not. There's a million other things that person is constantly trying to decide. Do I like make the change? Do I do this thing, right? And it's just one more on the pile of the infinite things that even for those people who are trying and like are taking steps in some dimensions or another, like to do stuff. Even with something that just seems small and insignificant can just be too much.
Yeah. Well, and what's really interesting about it is this often happens with people who explicitly ask for help. They'll say, I want to do better. What should I do? And then if you give them like one thing, then they'll give you a laundry list of reasons why they're not going to do it. And so that's the other thing to kind of bear in mind is just that like even with low hanging fruit or things that like sound to you like they're obvious or easy because you're used to doing things that way or whatever. If you propose that solution to somebody else, it is going to conflict with the way that they currently do things, which means that it's naturally going to have resistance, even if they claim to want to do it.
I would think about it.
And even if they actually agree with you completely, they're like, yeah, that would be good if I did do that.
Would be good. I'm not going to do it, but like exercise. We all know that exercise is important. There's a trillion studies about it, blah, blah, blah. But it's a lot. It's expensive. Yeah. It takes a lot of time. It's hard. It's not that comfortable. And it's just yet another one of those things that just throw it on the pile of things that I probably should be doing. So, life is hard. So anyways, we do have a really good question that I want to say. We don't have any time, but I want to put a pin in it for next week. Okay. So remember, I want to go hard to the questions next week.
Remember, but
this first question is probably going to be a real can of worms. So I'm very excited about it. So that'll be next week's episode because we have no more time. So we'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost up the charts and help us have a successful launch when the game comes out. We'd appreciate it. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.